It's Pyram King. I'm really excited to bring to you another Curse of Strahd interview. And with me today, I have Wyatt Trull. Now, if you spend any time on DMS Guild, you probably know who he is. Over 70 guides and adventures on DMS Guild, including the very famous Wedding at Ravenloft. We've chatted online, but it's so nice to have you here. I just want to jump into this, but before we do, why don't you introduce yourself to the community and tell us how you got involved in RPGs and specifically Curse of Strahd before we get into the questions.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Pyram. Yeah, we have chatted a lot online, and it's nice to, finally hear your voice. So it was the year 2015, and I just woke up one day and realized I had been waiting to play Dungeons and Dragons my whole life and just didn't know it, I used to role play on World of Warcraft. I was playing World of Warcraft and other fantasy games since I was a kid, and it just never struck me before to play D&D until that day. And I didn't know anybody, but I knew this guy who played D&D, and he was really flaky. So I cornered him at school, and I said, give me the number for your dungeon master. So I call up this guy named Richard, and I'm like, hey, I can get 4 nerds to the local gaming store if you'll teach us D&D. And he said, sure, I love teaching newbies. So I called up my closest friends, and I was like, we're doing this. Show up at Friday. So we show up, and Richard runs us through character creation and all that. And we find out that we're playing Curse of Strahd, but we don't know what that means. So he runs us through the death house, and it was very bloody. My best friend died to the nursemaid specter with an unlucky crit because he didn't know that walking backwards provokes opportunity. Boom, instant death. So it was a great start, and that's why Curse of Strahd has always been my favorite D&D module. I've played several of them. I've read almost all of them, but Curse of Strahd remains close to my heart for that reason.
Now, we've talked before. Weren't you in Japan when you started playing Curse of Strahd?
So that was when I DM'd my longest running Curse of Strahd. So I graduated college in 2016. 3 months later, I was teaching English in Japan.
Wow.
Found some other English teachers. They also wanted to play D&D, so I did run them through Curse of Strahd. For some of them, it was their first experience in D&D. There was about 5 of them, and we were from all over the place. We had 3 Americans, someone from the UK, and an Australian. We're all just playing on Tuesdays. So they were my best campaign. They actually made it to the end. They defeated Strahd. It was for them that I wrote The Wedding at Ravenloft. I didn't even know you could be a freelance D&D writer or RPG writer back then. I just wrote The Wedding, and then when I got back to America, I learned about the Dungeon Masters Guild, and so I said, hell, I can try. And so I polished up The Wedding and put that out, and because of the great reception that had, along with a few other supplements like the Castle Ravenloft flowchart map,
right? Which I use that.
Yes. They actually use it for the yearly Strahd Must Die thing on the COS Reddit.
Right.
So because of all that, I got my start as a writer, and it is all due to Curse of Strahd.
Now, your Wedding is a platinum bestseller. I mean, I constantly see it pop up, whether it's on Discord or on Reddit. So it's really, really well known. And if you watching haven't picked it up, I recommend. I'll put a link down in the description below, going over to DMS Guild, picking up, because it really adds this fun flavor element to it. Because throughout the theme of the campaign, obviously Strahd's going after Tatiana via Irina. There's the abbot and there's the wedding dress, and so it just kind of feels like the one thing missing in Curse of Strahd is a wedding, and you put that together. Now, you had a couple other really big ones. You've done 70 guides now. I mean, probably one of the most prolific DMS Guild producers. The another one, I think it's called the Lords of Barovia. Is that right? Or the Lords of...
We're talking. So I've done. Now these were a few collaborations where I was hired as the writer. Barovia, Born and Raised was one.
Right.
With CZ RPG. CZ and I both had the idea of like, what if you run Curse of Strahd either as a sandbox, a true sandbox without like the actual plot, or if you wanted Barovian characters. So I wrote several origins, whether you were Valakian from the village. I tied in different species. Like, if you want to be an Asimar, I was like, great, you're the Morning Lord's chosen. You are his vessel. You are here to right the wrongs of not just Strahd, but the Abbot. So I was trying to tie in all these optional things for the Dungeon Master and their players. I even added Goliaths. In the Balinok Mountains, we know that there are mountain clans, but they don't get much of a part in the story. And in standard 5e lore, Goliaths are isolationists anyway that hail from the mountains. So
that's a great idea. I didn't even think about introducing the Goliath that way. That's a really, really good idea.
Thank you. I just wanted to, because players don't want to be human, and since this is a Gothic horror, it's honestly better, in my opinion, if everyone is human, but that's not... Right. If you're going for the classic Van Helsing Dracula sort of campaign, humans really are the standard fare. But players in 5e don't want to play human. That's just an unfortunate fact. I'm one of the people who stan humans. I love humans. I wish humans got better representation in 5e and fantasy games. I wish they weren't so boring, like stat-wise. So I wanted to take Barovia Born and Raised as an opportunity to induct the Goliaths, Asimar, and Tieflings with not like large populations, but explain why you might be a Tiefling or Asimar in Barovia. And add a little more to the Dusk Elves without changing the rule that there are no female Dusk Elves left because Strahd and Richten killed them all.
I noticed, and I don't know if it's out yet, but I've been reading a lot about it. You're writing for Grimm Press a prequel to Curse of Strahd, right?
Mm-hmm. So that came out last month. It's Assault on Castle Ravenloft. Trevor at Grimm Press wanted me to write a sort of like flashback adventure that could act as a prologue for new players of Curse of Strahd and veterans, where you assume the role of Knights of the Order of the Silver Dragon. Cool. And you march on Castle Ravenloft. So I wrote it. It changes a little bit about the lore just for the sake of the adventure. It's the day of Sergei's wedding. News has arrived to the Order, who are hidden in the valley, that the guards are turning on the wedding goers, that some have attacked Strahd. There's news that Strahd is gravely injured. Sergei is dead. So Argynvost and Vladimir Horngard decide that this is the opportunity to finally take down the Devil Strahd. And the players are knights. They're meant to be fighters or rogues, maybe a paladin, depending on whatever your party makeup is. And you are sent ahead of the army to secure the gatehouse, get the drawbridge, get the gatehouse, and prepare for an invasion of Castle Ravenloft.
Wow.
But it's doomed because Strahd is not gravely injured. Strahd is not dead. He is undead, and you are going to learn it right then and there.
Oh, wow. Is that what level is that adventure for?
I designed it for 5th level because it's a one-shot. You want your players to have fun, and I feel like a lot of the Curse of Strahd veterans would prefer to have extra attack or a 3rd level spell. And I balanced it by having several appearances. First off, Richten makes an appearance.
Oh, cool.
Kazan is still alive, and he makes an appearance.
Oh, cool.
He takes down Argynvost. Argynvost arrives in dragon form, and that's how the players themselves learn that Argynvost is a dragon. Cool. With a souped-up Earthbind spell or a shot of lightning, Argynvost gets plot damaged, and allowing the players to defend him.
Now, just out of curiosity, let's say I'm going to start a Curse of Strahd campaign. Would this be okay to run before the campaign? Is it revealing too much if I just want to do a one-shot level 5 before we start the campaign? Would that work? Or
so I try to maintain that delicate balance of you don't want too much. I think Curse of Strahd is so prevalent in the D&D community that everyone already knows Strahd is a vampire. So that's not a spoiler. Right. We're just getting the prep. I think learning that Argynvost is a dragon is also a minor spoiler. Right. You'll learn it as soon as you walk into Argynvost Holt anyway. Right. The Richten is there. So really it's just putting faces to characters that the players will meet with different characters 400 years later, 300 years, because it's set on the day of the wedding. So no, you can play it. I would read through it just to decide what you're comfortable with your players knowing. If they don't know anything, then perhaps that adventure's not for you. But for players that have done Curse of Strahd and want to do it as a one-shot, or for players that know a little bit about Curse of Strahd, this is the one shot for them.
Actually, it just popped in my mind. It probably would be a great one shot to break up your campaign. So as when your players get to Argynvost, you can say, "Hey, the next session we're going to play this kind of like dream sequence."
Exactly,
You guys all play. That would be really. I mean, that's a great idea.
So in the adventure, I specifically do use the phrase flashback when describing the adventure to the GM. So that is perfectly valid. Plus, also, in the 5e community, the Curse of Strahd community, there's the interactive Tome of Strahd that a lot of people love to use. It would perfectly fit into there. You know, it is Strahd's diary. You could have that be one of the flashback adventures, the Assault on Castle Ravenloft.
So of all the content that you've done for Curse of Strahd, I know you've done stuff for the Mad Mage and for Icewind Dale, but of your Strahd canon that is available on DMS Guild, what are the top 3 that you would recommend to players, or the top 3 that you're most proud of? I would definitely put the wedding in there for sure.
The wedding is my most proud achievement. Now, I've learned a lot in the 5 years since then, but I think it really was a well-executed product and story, because Curse of Strahd does need a wedding. And I always found that it was so odd that it makes such a big deal about Strahd's chase and predatory nature, but there's no wedding at the end. That's one of my favorite things I've ever written. I'm most proud about that. And it's actually getting an update. I do now, 5 years later, I do know how to make a better looking PDF, and I have a better art budget. I have a team. I have an editor. So I've actually been working on a new update, which anyone who's ever bought the wedding will get for free, because I'm just replacing the old file on Dungeon Masters Guild with a new PDF.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm also preparing it for print. So anyone that wants it in physical form can order it. Now, that's going to take a few weeks because of the print on demand process of getting it inspected and such. But within the next 2 months or so, the new and updated PDF will be coming out. And again, any one of the 2,000 plus people who have bought the wedding will get it just sent to their email for free.
Wow.
And that was a long-winded way to say.
Very gracious of you.
Well, it's because of the Curse of Strahd community that I got my start, and it wouldn't be right to like make a new product or anything like that, because it's about the players, it's about the DMs, it's not about the profit. And I just I also want this in physical form to be on my bookshelf finally. But yeah, that's a very long-winded way to say that the wedding is the one I'm most proud of. The Assault on Castle Ravenloft that we already discussed, I think that's also a good flashback adventure. And the third one is what I'm working on currently, the Curse of Strahd Companion. I did companion guides for Dungeon of the Mad Mage and Icewind Dale, where I went through chapter by chapter with my own advice, with new flavor text, tactics for the battles, new plot points, new storylines, which is especially needed in some of the Curse of Strahd chapters where it's just too much of a sandbox and it leaves the dungeon master not really knowing what to do. So the Curse of Strahd Companion is in its final chapter. I'm working on the Castle Ravenloft chapter, which I had to save for last because it's the end of the adventure. The other 16 chapters have already been out, and once the Castle Ravenloft is done, I will be incorporating it into a complete edition, one PDF, one print-on-demand product, and the companion is written with the wedding already in mind. So wedding is also the conclusion of it. So there are 17 chapters in the complete edition of the Curse of Strahd Companion, and as we know, there's 16 chapters in Curse of Strahd, the 15 Death House, and so the wedding. So anyone who purchases this will have the wedding there as well. And in the Krezk chapter is where I set that up of how Strahd should get Irina, where Irina gets killed at the pool in Krezk and is brought up to the abbey where the abbot can resurrect her. Strahd appears and takes her away.
Now, let's dive into some questions. I got some questions here. These are questions that I've received, but I think with your experience, especially running Curse of Strahd several times, all the stuff that you've written for Curse of Strahd, your advice and insight might be extremely helpful to a lot of people that are starting for the first time. So my first question is, for those DMs, whether they're brand new or experienced, but they haven't started Curse of Strahd yet, what's your first recommendation? They want to run Curse of Strahd. What would you say to them?
I would say you need to read the campaign cover to cover, but that's 200 plus pages. You need to look up a video guide that works as an overview, because Curse of Strahd loves to bury small details that end up being really big plot points all over the book. And if you don't know exactly what's going to happen for the entire campaign, you're going to wind up, caught with your pants down later on in the campaign. So basically, you need to look up an overview, I would say. I've got a lot to talk about this question, but back to you.
So that's been my advice too. Is read through the book cover to cover, ignore the stat blocks, everything, but get familiar with the locations, the NPCs, everything like that. Now, there's some great third-party content out there. Obviously, your third-party content, but I know there's some other fan content, including my own. And one question I get a lot is, how should I incorporate, or what should I incorporate out there? I know some people have some, Mandy Ma, Dragon Carta, Lunch Break Heroes, yourself. What's your suggestion on approaching third-party content out there?
So, especially in a campaign where you only have so much time with your players in real life, I do think that it can be too much third-party content. So you have to analyze what appeals to you and your players, and then sift that out to make your own sample plot. Because a lot of our guides, they might clash with each other, or they might all work together, but it might take too much time at your table. And sometimes, every session you're working against that invisible clock of when does real life, kill my campaign.
Right.
So it's a balancing act of seeing not only what works together plot-wise with all our third-party content, but what will not drag out your own sessions, your own table.
Let me ask you this question, because I get this quite a bit, is, Curse of Strahd is really designed to level 10, maybe 11. What happens is, I get this question sometimes, I want to run it to level 15, or I want to run a higher level campaign. What's your recommendations for that?
Don't do it, number one. Because Curse of Strahd is a Gothic horror, and D&D is a superhero game in a fantasy close. You can't have one and the other, unfortunately, unless you start bending the system with, say, like gritty realism. The system's just not designed for horror in mind, and Curse of Strahd requires that horror. I would say, I've seen the CR30 Strahd von Zarevich stat block online before. And while that's pretty cool, I just don't think DMs that want a 15th level campaign, I feel like they're gonna be disappointed when you throw everything at your party and they're still standing, and you still have 3 more hours left until you're done with your session.
Right.
So
I agree with that as well. I mean, D&D is designed for epic hero, or 5e, I should say, not D&D, but 5e specifically is epic hero, high level stuff, and Gothic Horror is just a whole different vein. I mean, it is interesting in some respects that Curse of Strahd is probably the most beloved, well-known, and most purchased campaign of all time in a high fantasy role-playing game. I mean, it's the only Gothic Horror campaign in the D&D canon, and but the system is really not designed for it. And that leads me to this next question. Are there any dungeon master guide variants or rule variants, or any homebrew that you think would be essential or important to consider to give it that Gothic horror flavor or feeling?
So for homebrew rules, Dark Vision's just straight out of my campaign. The curse on Barovia obscures the vision of elves and other Dark Vision ancestries, because you need that darkness for horror, in my opinion. The gritty realism rule found in the Dungeon Master's Guide is also pretty good. It's not perfect for Curse of Strahd. When I run Curse of Strahd, in some of my campaigns I've done 10-minute short rests, but 3-day long rests.
Okay.
But if you're in a safe town like Vallaki or Barovia, it's still your standard 8-hour rest. So if they're in the wilderness, that's in my book where you need to start reinforcing like gritty realism, because otherwise you sleep for 8 hours, boom, you're back up to full hit points, full spell slots, and then we go back to the problem of 5e being a superhero game and you're playing a Gothic horror where you need fear and fragility.
Well, let me ask you a question and walk me through this a little bit. So, how do you see the long rest with the gritty realism for the 3 days or something working? How would you incorporate that?
Could you clarify that question for me?
Well, I understand. I think I agree with you. You know, you're in Vallaki or you're in the village of Barovia, find a secured location so you can sleep. But when you're on the road, is what you're saying, is when you don't have a safe shelters when you're enforcing gritty realism.
Yes, I think a simple rule is simple justification is if you need to be on watch, you're not able to get a full rest.
That's a good point.
And again, this is a mechanics versus storytelling problem. Were it up to me, I would say you can only get a long rest per arc in your campaign. That way, it doesn't matter the days that pass. Yes, you sleep and everything. But the game isn't designed where you can tell your players, all right, we're beginning our next arc. This is your time frame of how to balance your resources. But with Barovia being so dangerous, with skeletons, werewolves, everything in the woods, I feel like it's very justified to say you must be on your guard at night, therefore you cannot rest fully.
So would you give them maybe a half rest?
I would let them use a short rest, let them throw hit dice if they're out in the woods. It's not a perfect system. It's not a perfect solution. It's just one of the many band-aids that, we Curse of Strahd GMs have to like use to try to bridge the gap between superhero, 5e, and Gothic horror.
Are there any races or classes that you would not, that you would rule out of your campaign, saying, hey, these are the classes and the races that I suggest, these ones you can't use?
So yes and no. I don't like to tell players that they can't play this, but I also tell them don't metagame. I tell them if I tell them we're playing Curse of Strahd, there's room for one holy person in the party. So discuss amongst yourselves. There's not going to be there can't be 3 paladins. There can't be 7 clerics, etc. It's just going to ruin the point of the campaign. I just have a frank conversation with my players of like, we're going for a Gothic horror. Let's fill the motifs out that we want. A Van Helsing type character as a rogue or a ranger. The holy man as a paladin or a priest. As for races, like I said, I love humans. I wish I could get a full Curse of Strahd human party, because when you see something other than a human, you know that, oh no, we might be in danger, especially in the Gothic horror. Unfortunately, that's not what you get in 5e, where everyone wants to play these shiny new ancestries that come out.
That's true.
So I try to tell them to like aim more for the low magic, low fantasy, and don't be a bunch of elves, But I don't ever really ban anything, because I feel like that's against the spirit of a highly customizable game like 5e. Yeah, I just ask that my players meet in the middle.
I've always approached it a little bit differently. I see Dungeons and Dragons as this kind of smorgasbord of options, of classes and races and location. It's up to me as the DM to say, well, this is my setting, and these are the handful of races that fit within my setting, and these are the handful of classes that fit with my setting. And so let my players know ahead of time, I'm giving you a choice of these because it fits within my particular setting. So I don't have somebody come in and saying, I want to be the turtle ninja,
Right. Yes, that's a fair point. I do ban the more, not ban's a harsh word, but I guess that's what I do. I do ask my players, don't play the really ridiculous stuff like Tortle. Because my flavor of fantasy is always the low fantasy. I like my orcs, my goblins, my elves, my humans, my dwarves, and my gnomes. And I'm not one of those GMs that all orcs are evil or anything like that. I just like having those basic ancestries in the party. Sure, a tiefling and an ASMR won't throw things off, but it's like when I feel like 5e really is, like you said, a smorgasbord of everything.
Right.
And it is within the GM's purview to say, for my campaign, the theme I want doesn't allow for turtles. So please just don't be a turtle. And you know what? GMs need to be more comfortable stating those boundaries to their players, because it's about our fun too. And for me, running a bunch of ridiculous characters through Curse of Strahd is not exactly fun. When the motif that I want is the Van Helsing Dracula story.
Just out of a kind of a crazy side question, I know this. I've seen this pop up a couple of times on Reddit and in my Discord. Some people have asked, "Have you thought about running Curse of Strahd in Pathfinder 2?" Or oh, okay.
No, not okay. Pathfinder, but I think about this all the time in the wee hours of the night when I can't sleep. I'm thinking about Curse of Strahd.
I do too. Of course. What system would you use?
Number one, so I haven't tested anything of this yet because I'm trying to finish my own last 5e campaign right now, which is not Curse of Strahd, just some homebrew campaign. But I want to try it in Call of Cthulhu. That's my first thing. I want to have humans transported from New York or Arkham or whatever to Barovia.
Wow.
With a lot less fantasy. Maybe remove the Dusk Elves or maybe make everyone humans. I don't know yet. But Call of Cthulhu is the first thing I want to do to have the players actually play in a horror. In a similar vein, I've been looking at systems like Dread. I'm wondering how well that would work for like a one-shot. Dread, for anyone listening, is
I'm not familiar with Dread.
Imagine a Jenga tower, and when you need to make an ability check, instead of rolling dice, you pull a brick from the Jenga tower.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah. Same thing with 10 Candles. I wonder how much I could mod the system to be Curse of Strahd. But Call of Cthulhu is my number one. If I was going to still lean into the fantasy, Dungeon World is my number two, because Dungeon World is powered by the Apocalypse game, where it's about fiction first and not the 5-foot square grid of combat, you know.
Right.
Especially we as adults, we have less time to run these campaigns. And Curse of Strahd is about a year-long campaign, maybe 9 months or so.
Mine took 18 months.
Yeah, and I feel like a large part of that is because of how slow combat is in D&D and how clunky the system might be. You know, we've had 10 years or so to learn the system, master the system, and recognize where it could be improved. And again, that with the superhero rules, it doesn't mesh well with Curse of Strahd. So I've been wondering for a long time now what other game systems would be good to run Curse of Strahd in. And Call of Cthulhu is my number one.
Well, I want to mention two things. I don't know if you're aware of it, because this is something I think about too, and people ask me about this. The first thing is, and I think it comes out today. Today is Thursday. Is the what do you call it? What's that show? Critical Role is released their one-shot horror rule set today. There should be free quick start for that, because they're going to be doing a show, maybe several episodes of Gothic Horror. So that might be worth checking out. I don't know what it's called, but when I find it, I'll send you.
Google it myself. Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, you mentioned Call of Cthulhu. I just purchased Call of Cthulhu, Octung Cthulhu, which is Morpheus's D20 system, kind of World War II. But I think that the 2D20 system is pretty interesting as well. So if you haven't looked at that, I would recommend that. But you're right. I think like a Call of Cthulhu is designed for horror, Gothic horror. Yes. If you ever get that up and running, I'd really like to know. And if I could participate, I would like to be a player. I will try not to metagame.
Well, I think that'd be the perfect system. Like, you might metagame. Maybe you're an oracle, maybe you're psychic, and so you know a few things, but you might be dead in 3 sessions, you know?
That's true. It's a deadly game.
So I've been trying to wrap up my own campaign and then start experimenting with those other systems for Curse of Strahd, which I recommend to any dungeon master that is a bit tired of 5e but loves the Curse of Strahd campaign, the setting, Barovia, Ravenloft, the community, because so much of what our third-party content that everyone puts out, from professionals to the guy that just had a brilliant idea and shared it on the subreddit, almost all of that can be converted.
Right.
And you just take the spirit of those and put them in other systems that might be better suited for it.
So, moving on to the next question, and I get this one quite a bit. And since not only you a writer, but you run Curse of Strahd in campaigns, this is a tough one here, is how do I prepare, not for the campaign, but my session prep? Especially something like Curse of Strahd. What are some tips, session prep tips, that you would recommend?
I would always first remind myself, or the GM, that this is a horror. And that doesn't necessarily mean combat to your players, but thinking about how do you spook your players, how do you lend ambiance to Barovia, whether it's like a raven cawing or a weird face in a gnarled tree. I would first look at the aesthetics of whatever area you're in and remind yourself that creepy, unexplained things is the basis of horror. So forget about trying to, tool in a random encounter. I would say lean in on the aesthetics, because that's what's going to leave a lasting impression on your players. Your players aren't going to always remember like the skeleton as was swiftly defeated because it has low AC or something like that. They're going to remember the impression that skeleton made. So first and foremost, just lean into the storytelling aspect rather than the game mastering aspect.
When you're prepping for a session coming up, one of the tips that I always remind people of is at the end of your last session, ask your players what they're going to be doing the next section. So, because it is kind of a sandbox game. Are there any things that you do behind the DM screen, keeping notes, or certain things or tips that you would recommend a GM or DM in Curse of Strahd?
I always ask my players, what do you think's happening? And when they come up with a great idea, I write that down.
What is of all your Curse of Strahd campaigns, what are some memorable horror events that surprised you or surprised your party?
Well, my first one when I was a player and didn't know anything about D&D or Curse of Strahd, of course, Death House was terrifying, with the nursemaid slaughtering my best friend's character with one hit. And unfortunately, that campaign died, a few sessions later because of outside commitments. That was one of my favorite memories. Now, as a GM, the slow realization of my players that the abbot is not a good person, that the abbot is, because immediately the paladin in that campaign used divine sense after witnessing the abbot resurrect Burgomaster Dmitry Krezkov's son. He immediately used divine sense, learned that the abbot is a celestial, and at first they were very excited about that fact, and then they went up to the abbey and saw all the horrors there, namely Vasilka, and learned that even in Barovia, even angels can be corrupted. So it's those slow moments that I treasure the most, where watching their faces as an unwelcome truth is unveiled before them. Or like Tatiana, when they visit Berez and they see a statue in the exact same likeness as Irina and learn that she's been reincarnated. Or go ahead.
That's a good one. I was just gonna say that's a really, really good one when people have that slow. It's like a slow burn.
Yes, sorry, that was the term I was looking for. Slow burn. And I think that's what the strength of Curse of Strahd is it has so many slow burn moments. People shouldn't reveal right off the cuff that Tatiana and Irina are the same. There's all these secrets in Barovia that you want to put out at certain times, like the fact that all the souls are trapped in this reincarnation cycle. I call it the black bottle in the Curse of Strahd companion and my own thing, my own campaigns, that when Irina was resurrected by the abbot, or Ilya, the burgomaster's son, was resurrected, that all the souls are trapped there in some sort of like black bottle waiting for someone to take a sip, aka a body being born that one of them might reincarnate into.
Right.
There are all these awful truths, especially the Shadowfell, the realization that you're in the Shadowfell, that are these slow burn moments that you need to treasure as a dungeon master and pace them out. In fact, in that Barovia Born and Raised product, I had a section called Secrets of Ravenloft, and with advice on when you should reveal these things to the players. Same thing in the Curse of Strahd Companion. I paced out when you should learn secrets or reveal them to your players, rather.
That's a really good idea. When you were playing, when you first played Curse of Strahd, was it Ravenloft or was it Curse of Strahd? Was it in the third or second edition?
It was a 5th edition Curse of Strahd.
Have you gone back and read through or used any of the third edition or second edition Ravenloft content?
I have looked up the Mystopedia, and learned a few tidbits here and there about the previous editions. I did read I, Strahd, Memoirs of a Vampire, which I found pretty useful for role-playing Strahd. And for those listening, I, Strahd is just a quick little novel written decades ago that details Strahd's conquest of Barovia, his descent into vampiredom, and the rebirth of Tatiana, and describing the cruel cycle that he's trapped in of searching for her. I find it amazing. A lot of the quotes you see in Curse of Strahd when you open to a new chapter are actually from that book. I cannot recommend it enough. There are a few incongruities in the lore, like just spoiler. In the book, Strahd doesn't go to the Amber Temple. Amber Temple doesn't exist. That's not where he becomes a vampire. A dark power reaches out to him on the eve of the wedding and says, "Hey, you're very disgruntled and jealous of your brother. How about you kill him?"
I think it was written before 2015, so before Curse of Strahd, because a lot of that, a lot of Curse of Strahd, a lot of people probably don't realize this. I first played it was Ravenloft in 1984. It was my first game. And then they obviously the third edition, Forgotten Realms added a bunch of stuff, and then Curse of Strahd is the reboot, which added all these additional locations to it. One of the things I actually really like about Curse of Strahd, which ironically is frustrating for many, is all the plot holes and all the things that are missing allows a creative DM to fill those things in there, which I obviously enjoy as do you. Putting all of that stuff together in there. So you haven't looked at any of the third edition Ravenloft stuff, Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, or any of those items?
No, never. I may have once read a summary on the Wikipedia, but I started with 5e. I've never played anything before that, and I do look up the lore. The Ravenloft subreddit is really useful for people who are like, this doesn't really make sense in Curse of Strahd. What's the historical canon and such? And there's a lot of weird changes in the lore from Curse of Strahd that don't make a lot of sense, apparently. But me being a 5e baby and a Curse of Strahd Ravenloft baby, it's a lot easier for me to just say, okay, that's the way it is.
Have you been following D&D One at all and the new rules that are coming out?
I read them. I read the playtests, but I have no intention of playing one D&D at all. I've spent the last year trying to wrap up my 5e campaign. Other than playtesting new products that I put out, I don't really want to touch 5e after this. Not be just because of the OGL controversies. I've just outgrown the system. I mentioned Dungeon World. Dungeon World is rules light. There is no zeroing in on combat. There's no 6-second turns or anything like that. It is a fiction-first system. And so that's why I actually haven't played Pathfinder 2 or looked at it at all, because I want less rules in my combat. I want less rules in general for my story.
It seems to me Pathfinder is more D&D adjacent than it is, going into a different route. Yeah, I've played, I haven't played any Pathfinder 2, but I've played some other OSR products. You did mention Call of Cthulhu, and one of the things that I do like about Call of Cthulhu, as well as Mithras and Traveler, is there's no levels in those games, so it's improving skills. And this is one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you not only have you written for Curse of Strahd, but you've written a lot of content for other modules. One of the things that I always felt difficult in writing content is Curse of Strahd is a level-based area, and while we call it a sandbox, and I'm sure people are going to leave comments down below, inherently, this is just my opinion, inherently when you have a level-based system, there is this kind of inherent trait that there is this kind of underlined railroad in it. Like, well, you can't go to the Amber Temple because you guys are level 3.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to go to these areas. And so it's a level-based kind of moving through a system that way, which makes it harder for me to write kind of a sandbox environment.
I agree. I think, it's a better marketing term just to call Curse of Strahd a sandbox, but Curse of Strahd is really a number of sandboxes gated by level, because you can go to the Amber Temple at 3rd level, but then your players are probably going to die, or you're going to pull all your punches and undermine the Gothic Horror.
Right.
So I think a series of sandboxes is a much better term, and I think that's okay. Yes, you have the underlying railroad, but I don't think that's as grave a sin, because at the end of the day, we're all adults coming together, and we know that we're telling a story with rules, and there's a philosophy of storytelling and a philosophy of game progression that we have to abide by.
Right. I was reading somewhere, and I forgot who did this. I think it was, I can't remember, but I watched the video where they had introduced Curse of Strahd entering from Krezk instead of from the gates of Barovia.
I wrote that. Yeah.
Oh.
I wrote that for Steve from Lunch Break Heroes. He hired me to write that. It's been about 2 years, so I don't remember exactly everything I put in, but yes, you can absolutely come in from Krezk, but it does require changing some of those mysteries around. And I actually looked it up. I did find my file for those campaign mysteries of like when you should explain them, and the Shadowfell being one of them. I can actually probably pull up that Krezk guide if you'd like. But what was your question about it?
So would you recommend it in entering in through Krezk, and B, if you were to do that, it seemed to me that it's going to be a lot of work, because that's a significantly higher level area than it is the village of Barovia.
So I just pulled it up for you in my Google Docs, and I can just read you some of the paragraph is entitled "The Issues with Krezk." Number 1, I would only do Krezk with veteran players who want to play Curse of Strahd, but don't want to go through the Death House again, don't want to go through the village again, because the crux of the entire Curse of Strahd module is Irina, and you need to introduce her sooner rather than later. So that's number 1 of the problems with Krezk, that you're putting your escort quest on the other side of the valley. But let's see. The issues I wrote in that guide for Steve were like, the Death House prologue is set in Village of Barovia. So if you want to run that, I wrote that you have to move it to outside Krezk, which is a great opportunity to lean into the Death House is aware of itself and it has its own power. So I wrote it that it's kind of like a genius loci, and it appears wherever you if you enter Barovia from the mountains, somehow the Death House is there waiting for you. It's always there waiting for you.
Okay.
Other problems are, like I said, the campaign revolves around Irina, and she's on the other side of the country. Madame Ava has to be met to get the knowledge of where your artifacts are, but you can remedy that by having her travel with some Vistani to Krezk or meet her on the Svalak Road. So that one's not a big deal. Another problem is Burgomaster Dmitry Krezkov does not allow strangers into Krezk, so you kind of have to hand wave that away. But that's not a big deal either. And it's one thing I've always also ignored in my own campaigns, of the whole, give us wine and we'll let you enter it. That seems a little too arbitrary. And the last problem I wrote down... yes, exactly. Most locales in the West are designed for 5th level or higher, so you're going to have to pull your punches, or you're going to be robbing yourself of the horror that they would get, because they're not as fragile as they are at 1st level or 3rd level when they're entering Barovia. Right.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. Now, if you were going to run Curse of Strahd again, whether it's in Call of Cthulhu or another system, would you consider entering in through Krezk?
Only with players that know a lot about Ravenloft, or if I was doing it more of a sandbox, like a true sandbox where we file off the title Curse of Strahd and we just say Barovia. I've often wondered about playing just Barovia as a setting, and that's what Barovian Born and Raised was partially about, that product I wrote for ZZRPG. Because I think Ravenloft is an amazing setting. I think when you remove the railroad to find all the artifacts and kill Strahd, it has an amazing opportunity to just be your default setting for your players. You don't have to worry about all the quests. You can just make it your own.
Well, what did you think about the Van Richten's guide that came out not too long ago?
The guide to Ravenloft with all the domains?
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed it. I know a lot of the complaints were that it had a lot less content than previous editions, or it changed some fundamental things about the other domains of Dread. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I love the artwork in it, especially the maps by Mike Sclee, for those that don't know, Mike Sclee is the cartographer for Curse of Strahd, so you're actually getting the same maps, the same style of maps from him. I thought it was a great source of information, and for those that do want to run Ravenloft as a sandbox, pick a few of those domains. I can't remember all their names, but there are some that are very similar to Barovia, and if you just link them together, it would make a great sandbox campaign. The domain that Van Richten is from specifically would be great to just attach to your Barovia.
Right. That's a good idea. Where he's from, I think that would be that makes a lot of sense. Now, as you're wrapping up your Curse of Strahd guides and modules on DMS Guild, what do you see as your next big projects? Will you be doing stuff in 5e, or are you going to be looking for writing for other systems?
It's hard to detach myself entirely from 5e because, number one, it's the system I grew up with, and it is, where the market is right now. I have a lot of other ideas that are that will be done with the OGL or Creative Commons. On Dungeon Masters Guild, I probably won't be putting more stuff up after my Curse of Strahd companion came out. This project, Heirs to Elemental Powers, came out yesterday, which is a Genasi overhaul. It's my first ever print-on-demand product.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's a Avatar The Last Airbender inspired overhaul to the Genasi with new lore.
No, wait a second. Let me see that. Is that really the Airbender?
Yeah, so
that is
for legal
really cool.
purposes, this is an entirely different font, and I'm actually not allowed to say in it that it's inspired by Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think. But I know what I wrote. I wrote this with all that in mind. We have art from Sticky Hunter, who did a lot of the custom art in here.
That is so. I'm gonna have to definitely pick that up. My son, when he's a lot younger, he was watching that, and I got addicted to that cartoon.
Yes.
I just thought, wow, this thing is just so well fleshed out, right? And it harkened back to the days when I liked the old Shaw Brothers Kung Fu movies, because I was a big Shaw Brothers 70s Kung Fu guy. I just thought that was really good. And I know there's an RPG that came out for The Last Airbender, but I've heard kind of mixed reviews on it.
I've heard mixed things, yeah. I think it's a Powered by the Apocalypse system as well.
Right.
But I heard mixed things. I heard that there's really no mechanical difference between being a bender and a non-bender, which left a lot of people disappointed.
So in this product that you did, the different benders, and
for legal purposes, they're not benders.
Right. They're elementalers or whatever.
Yes.
So there is a difference between them.
For my product, really it was just an overhaul of the Genasi traits as well as new subraces for the Genasi. Core Artificer was my co-writer for this, and he has a vast knowledge of the planes in 5e. So he said to me, hey, let's make Genasi that are not just like fire plus water, but fire plus the negative plane, and that's where you get Ash Genasi and stuff like that.
Oh, very cool.
So thanks to him, we have 16 new Genasi subraces. Half of them being 2 elements combined in one, but the other half being an element plus the positive plane or the negative plane, which was really cool. Like Void Genasi are air plus negative. Salt Genasi are water plus negative plane and such like that. So his ideas were a huge part of this book. There's another piece of page I'd like to just show off. It was like, remember that everything changed when the fire Genasi attacked.
Right.
So that came out yesterday. That's one of my final projects on the DMs Guild. This has been a labor of love, many years in the making. We had a lot of setbacks getting this into print, but we finally got it there. Because I put the team together years ago, and we just had delays of like, it took me a while to finish writing it, for example. So it finally came out yesterday, and we're really excited about that.
Well, no, that's really awesome. Now, when you stop publishing on DMS Guild, where can we expect to find your new content? I have your website up here, and just by the way, let me see if I can get my mouse over here. I mean, the amount of content you put out is just,
I also don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I haven't updated that portfolio in a long time. So there's like double the amount of stuff I should put up there.
Yeah,
but I've been a bit too lazy about updating that.
I'll just go here really quickly. I have here's the Wedding of Ravenloft. But if I go back to, you have a lot of stuff.
Thank you.
A lot of content.
I'll still be putting stuff out on Drive-Thru-RPG because it's a good website, good market. It's a bit harder than DM's Guild to get your footing there and be noticed since there's so many products. But that's the chief place that I'll be putting things. To answer your question earlier, I want to get into Mothership, the sci-fi horror RPG.
Oh yes,
yes. They have a booming field for writers right now because they have a very, like Morkborg as well, that's another system I'd like to get into. They have a very open license for writers because the creators understand that to keep a game alive, you need content. And so they are very much encouraging writers to make their own Mothership modules and their own Morkborg modules. And that's where I want to go. Earlier, we talked about what other systems I would run Curse of Strahd in, and you just mentioned OSR stuff. I haven't played any OSR minus the Black Hack, but I do think that is the step in the right direction to run Curse of Strahd in a system like that is quicker and you're more fragile in. So Shadow Dark by the Arcane Library came out. I know she's having a huge open license as well, because again, knowing that the blood of a game is content, and so we're all getting the content. Making content.
Knave 2 is I picked that up too. Well, I have Knave 1 and I like Ben's stuff a lot. I have Knave and Maze Rats.
There's plenty of great games coming out, like the creator from Stars Without Number and Worlds Without Number is making a cyberpunk game called Cities Without Number.
That's Kevin Crawford, yeah.
Yes. 13th Age is coming out with a second edition apparently this year or next, which I'm excited. I've only read through 13th Age, which is another fantasy.
Oh, and a system I really like, Shadow of the Demon Lord, is coming out with a more high fantasy version of it, because Shadow of the Demon Lord is pretty heavy, dark fantasy, which I really like that system. By the way, I saw him in an interview. He was one of the original 5e designers and wanted to write something that he thought the way the 5e should be, and that's why he developed Shadow of the Demon Lord. So
that's also another system I'm excited to try. As soon as my 5e campaign is over, I'm spending the next year just doing 1-shots or 3-shots in other systems to learn them as best I can.
Now, last question before we go. Do you play online at all, or are you always playing in person?
I prefer to play in person. That's what I currently do. But especially when I was teaching in Asia, online was the only means possible. With that Curse of Strahd campaign, I talked about where I wrote the wedding diegetically. That was online on Roll20 because although me and my players, we all worked for the same company, we were spread out across the province of Ibaraki in Japan. So it would have taken like 2 hours for us to reach each other in person. So we just played on Roll20. I've played plenty of campaigns on Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, but I just don't think you can. It doesn't have the same magic as playing in person, which is my preferred method.
I agree. I spent almost 5 years living in Japan. My parents were foreign exchange teachers as well, so we were in Kobe there. But unfortunately, I live in central Portugal in a small town, so there's no.
So it's hard. Yeah.
So I'm pretty much exclusively playing online, but I would just love to get some people together to play in person. But, you know, what can you do? Hey, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with me. I know we chat sometimes online, but it's great to get your insight, especially to hear about all the projects that you're working on. I'm going to put links to all of your content and your website down below. Make sure you go ahead and check that out. Definitely get the wedding. Pick that up. I'll put a link down for that. I think that's a really cool thing. I had one more I wanted to ask you about. I didn't buy it, and I was looking at it the other day, and it's the Darklords of Ravenloft.
Oh, yeah, I wrote that as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
So Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft was coming out, and we heard that there wasn't a lot of. We heard from people who not beta read it, but got early copies of it, that there weren't stat blocks for a lot of the Dark Lords. And some of the Dark Lords were as simple as, oh, she's a noble with these changes to her stats. And I just thought that was so boring. And so I set out with Chris Hopper, my layout guy, and Matt Wolf as my editor. And I just blitzed through, with all these ideas for how to make the Dark Lords actual combat worthy foes, because while I think it's fair that a lot of the Dark Lords are just normal people without magic or anything like that, it's a combat heavy game. So whether some of the more mundane Dark Lords, I said that they were being protected by the dark powers and had some plot armor, some better luck, some better AC. Others, I was like, they have poisons, alchemy at their disposal. Others were like the Mage of Hazlan or whatever. Hazlan, I think, is his name.
Right.
Where I was like, he's great. Let's just make some unique stuff for him, because making him an Archmage is just boring. So that was another labor of love, where I just took every Dark Lord. I made stat blocks for all of them with different tiers. So if you wanted to run a campaign in that domain at a certain level, you could have an upgraded or downgraded stat block for the Dark Lord.
That's a
to an
great
extent.
idea.
Some of them, I was like, they can't be 4th level, or they can't be tier 4 villains. Some of them just don't have the narrative power to be so. But a lot of them had scaling stat blocks for all 4 of the tiers.
When do you get a time to breathe? I mean, all your writing, all the content. I mean, you're putting out so much content. When are you going to get a vacation?
I guess every day's a vacation, because I love my work. I did have a lot of time as a teacher between classes when I didn't have when I was done with my lesson planning and such. That's why I had so much stuff, especially living on the other side of the world, where there was not much to do, on after school, after work. But right now, I do this full time. That's where I got the time to. I have too much time on my hands, I guess. And that's where I get the time to make all these products.
Hey, Will, thank you so much for spending an hour of your time. I know you're really busy writing content. You got new products coming out. Again, I'll put all those links down below. I really, really appreciate it. Hey, and thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next time, this is Parm King, and may all your roles be critically successful.
Thank you for having me.